Tonight, the shutdown continues and we have no end in sight. Both sides digging into their respective positions. We're going to hear about the human toll this is taking right from the mouths of people who are not getting paid. Then tons of new developments in the Russia probe. Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, and of course, President Trump, all back in the news. Former federal prosecutor joins us to weigh in on the latest developments. Also, our panel of attorneys is here to take a look at the big legal stories of the day, including the case of Rudy Giuliani. How did he go from America's mayor to President Trump's TV lawyer who keeps making things impossibly even worse for his client? Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks a lot for joining us this Wednesday. Well, it's not good news on the national front. Day 33 of the government shutdown, and it is still a he said, she said in D.C., with dueling votes scheduled for tomorrow on bills that could, and that's an operative word, reopen the government, but probably will not.
We have voted to open up government by putting forth bills that have passed the Senate, but under the Republican leadership. But now they're not taking us for an answer.
All that needs to happen is for our Democratic friends to agree that it's time to put the country ahead of politics, take yes for an answer.
But today, at least there is some sort of movement on the Hill, even though it does appear Congress is still getting nowhere fast. I'm bringing a senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, with more on this. And it is depressing every day, most importantly for the people impacted, but also just seeing how intransigent D.C. is.
Well, and it's frustrating because there's no light at the end of the tunnel, or at least hasn't been, although we're starting to see the tiniest little crack of what could be some light, but probably won't amount to anything. Let's start in the House of Representatives. House Democrats are reportedly willing to offer more money for border security, but, and this is a big but, that's contingent on the government opening first, and there's no money in that package for a wall, so that proposal is probably DOA. Plus, the Senate is set to vote on those two competing bills tomorrow. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is pushing a GOP plan that includes nearly $6 billion in wall funding. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's bill, that would simply fund the government for 3 weeks to open things back up and get checks flowing to the 800,000 workers who aren't getting paid. That would enable everyone to regroup and try to find a longer-term solution. Each proposal requires 60 votes, so it's likely that neither one will pass. Meantime, 800,000 government workers continue to live without paychecks. That is making times tougher and tougher for them.
It's getting harder, but we're holding on. We're coming to work and doing our job.
You expect, pay for hard work, and you wake up and your bank account's empty.
My wife also is a transportation security officer, so we have lost both our incomes.
Whatever we bought with our very last check is just going to have to last.
It's going to help my family by, providing us with a meal.
This is my third time, and we plan on coming every day for lunch.
We will be missing payments on our bills.
The bills keep coming, they don't stop.
Where do I get the money to buy groceries?
It affects our retirement, it affects just everything.
It's a matter of life and death for me.
I have to tell my kids, I don't know where it's coming from.
We're scared. We have families.
But it's not just government workers and their families feeling the squeeze. Millions of people who live in federally subsidized housing are now worried that they're going to be out on the street because their rents won't be getting paid.
I may be in line to become a homeless person again.
And then there's members of our armed services also feeling the pinch. Here's the head of the U.S. Coast Guard.
We're 5+ weeks into the anxiety and stress of this government lapse and your non-pay. You, as members of the armed forces, should not be expected to shoulder this burden. I remain heartened by assistance available to you within the lifelines and by the outpouring of support from local communities across the nation. But ultimately, I find it unacceptable that Coast Guard men and women have to rely on food pantries and donations to get through day-to-day life as service members.
It's not just the Coast Guard either. Now the head of the FBI Agents Association is saying that the shutdown is handcuffing the Bureau.
The failure to fund the FBI undermines essential FBI operations, such as those designated to combat crimes against children, drug and gang crimes, and terrorism. This lack of funding to the FBI is hurting operations, it is hurting personnel across the board, and it is going to hurt our recruitment, and it is going to hurt our retention.
So if the argument, Rich, is that the situation on the border with Mexico is a security issue for the United States, well, we've got a couple of examples now, the Coast Guard and the FBI, where it's actually hurting the functions and the people who help protect that security.
Airports, TSA, we can, people inspecting our food at the FDA, we can keep going down the alphabet soup of agencies that are being impacted. This is so stupid. We're going to look back at just the stupidity of this, but for folks who weren't with us last night, and I went in a whole diatribe about just the complete unnecessariness of all this, you showed how the calendar, this thing goes from bad to worse. This week, people are going to be missing their second paycheck. You saw snippets of people, they're getting afraid now. They were angry before, they're scared now. And Andrew, it's not just those people, and you mentioned all the other ancillary businesses impacted, but in the coming weeks, things like food stamps, things like school lunch programs, safety net, vital safety net stuff starts all going away.
And the one that caught my eye is that municipalities will start to lose half of their funding for their transit systems. So a lot of transit systems around the country rely on Department of Transportation funding. They're not going to be able to keep their buses running. They're not going to be able to keep their staff in place. I mean, it's actually going to keep people at home if it keeps on going. And the other thing is there's no one target date for these things to start happening. It sort of spreads little by little as individual budgets run out of money.
And you look at the numbers here, it's not like people haven't affixed blame on this, right?
Yeah, and we've got that polling on the shutdown that's coming in, and obviously Democrats and Republicans blaming each other, but the American people clearly pointing fingers at the GOP and at President Trump, at least according to the polls. New numbers from Politico show that more than half of the Americans asked blame Republicans and President Trump. About a third blame the Democrats. There was also an extraordinary number in today's polling that absolutely floored me. This is not it. This is just a straight up question. Do you support a border wall or not? Take a look at the numbers. 43% still support a border wall. 49% are opposed to it. Now keep that in mind, because when asked if funding the wall was the only way to reopen the government, that's where things got surprising. 72% of people say they'd oppose funding the wall, 7% would support it if it was the only way to reopen the government. That means 8 in 10 people who say they want a wall oppose using the shutdown as the cudgel to get it. And I thought that was extraordinary, Rich, because that shows that people understand the dynamics that's at play here. And even if they want the wall, 8 in 10 of them are saying this isn't the way to go about getting it. I mean, so there's no energy and there's no movement behind building a wall under these circumstances.
And, as I mentioned last night, the word hostage or extortion, whatever you want for this wall, and if you go through, as we did last night, how we got here, it's even more mind-numbing. But this only gets worse. Now, to the point of if there's blame and then there's political pressure, what time do you think Republicans say, I can't keep doing this anymore? Now all of a sudden, he's not just getting blamed, I'm getting blamed too.
We may get our first taste of that tomorrow with these votes in the Senate. Again, both bills aren't expected to pass. McConnell's bill, the Trump bill, will go first. That's the one that has $6 billion for the border wall. That will fail, and every Democrat will vote against it. Some Republicans will vote against it as well. The second bill is the one that temporarily opens the government for 3 weeks. You will get 5+ Republicans, I'm sure, who vote in favor of it. Probably not enough to get it past the 60-vote threshold, but you may start to see more and more Republicans peeling off. That'll be the first chink in the armor.
And the magic number is 13, by the way, that they'd need 13 Republican votes to pick up. Right. Okay. And of course, this is all in the ramp up to the State of the Union. Where the heck are we with this now, Andrew?
It's not happening. At least it's not happening on Tuesday, as we learned that today, Rich. And let's be clear, this was Nancy Pelosi's decision, but in a lot of ways, the president forced her to make the decision that she made. Yesterday, the White House sent a letter to Pelosi asking for a walkthrough of the Capitol to prepare for an address on Tuesday. And this morning, he sent Pelosi this letter that said, I look forward to seeing you on the 29th, essentially confirming without asking that he would deliver a speech. A short time later, Pelosi responded saying the House will not pass the required resolution allowing a presidential address until the government is reopened. In other words, she gave Trump a rain check and canceled the State of the Union. And as you might expect, Mr. Trump then blamed everyone for the cancellation except himself.
The State of the Union speech has been canceled by Nancy Pelosi because she doesn't want to hear the truth. She doesn't want the American public to hear what's going on. And she's afraid of the truth. And the super left Democrats, the radical Democrats, what's going on in that party is shocking. I know many people that were Democrats and they're switching over right now, and they're switching over quickly.
None of that is true. None of that is true.
Not true at all.
None.
I had no conversations with anyone. And we don't have time here, but a clip that made this guy laugh is, what off all afternoon was the president said there's this speech. It's called the State of the Union, like he's breaking news here to everybody they didn't know about.
And then he said, because Speaker Nancy Pelosi, or as I call her, Nancy. That's what everybody calls her. That's her name.
Okay, but listen, we had a debate, Andrew and I and others. I thought if Pelosi ends up not letting the president deliver the State of the Union, because the speaker has to technically invite the president, she's going to look as bad as he is, that it's romper room, it's he said, she said by definition. However, the way that he did it today, and there's sound that we don't have time for, with the president saying, I told her I'm doing it, and then she can't be then forced to capitulate to him, so she had to call his bluff and say no. That all said, it's a bad look. And I'm worried, Andrew. I know you think there's no political risk to her to do what she did, but we are destroying norms in this country.
We are.
In the last 2 years, seemingly by the day. And the idea that we're setting some kind of precedent in this bizarre world that if a speaker doesn't like a president, we won't hear from the president. It's supposed to be, what is the state of our union, that our elected president will tell the nation. We're not going to get that. I know it would have been a BS use of an hour. There'll be lies that'll outnumber the truths and all the rest. But still, I'm worried about what's happening beyond this guy.
And I am too. And I value those norms just as much as you do. I mean, that's part of what's been so unsettling about this administration is all the deviations and the derivations from the norms. But as I said to you in our conversation this morning, you can worry about installing the sprinkler system in the building after you put the fire out. I mean, and it seems
He's
to me
still going to speak somewhere Tuesday,
Of
Andrew.
course he is, but it's going to be whatever it is. It's not going to be a State of the Union address, which, by the way, probably shouldn't happen when the government isn't functioning. And at least according to Pelosi, she will still invite him to deliver the State of the Union after the government is reopened. So we may still get that formal joint session of Congress down the road.
From those closest to the president, they say the idea of a lost opportunity to have undivided attention without questions and the world listening to him, it will be the most painful punishment this president will have. I think there'll be some MAGA rally somewhere, whether it's along the border or pick a red state, but
not sure.
Call
It'll be
Union
fascinating to see what they do in response to not being able to deliver the State of the Union. Frankly, I'm glad that we're not going to have that awful visual of Trump insulting Pelosi sitting right behind him, and just them faking like they're getting along for an hour when in reality everybody knows they're not. I think we're past that right now in the country.
It is such a mess. All right, Andrew, thank you. As I said off the top here, a lot of news on the Russia probe. Up next, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. He'll join us to talk about the very latest. Now Bob Mueller investigating the NRA's ties to the Trump campaign and possible Russia influence. And Michael Cohen, all of a sudden, well, he's not going to be testifying to Congress. That is without a subpoena.